Ymedia Group, the fastest growing media group in North America.
Welcome once again to Ymedia Foreign Policy Report. We have our co-host Ramona Singh with us. We'd like to welcome her. Ramona ji, warm welcome on Ymedia. How are you?
I'm doing quite well. How are you today?
I'm doing great, and just a quick update on the proceedings that are happening, and I would want to ask your views on that. Uncertainty still prevails. I would say that uncertainty still prevails as far as the peace talks are concerned. I must tell you this thing that this news was coming that maybe Vice President J.D. Vance would head towards Islamabad, and yesterday I was at a meeting and this was discussed that J.D. Vance is already in Pakistan. Absolutely not. As we speak, J.D. Vance is still in Washington. We know President Trump was also there in the White House. We saw Secretary of State Marco Rubio there as well, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth also there. And mind you, it will take approximately 15 hours flying from White House or from Washington, D.C. to Islamabad. Yes, Islamabad is all set to host Iran and U.S. discussions, but Pakistan's information minister, he has acknowledged that Iran hasn't sent the final confirmation as we speak. It's a very fluid situation. Things could change by the minute. Stay tuned with Ymedia. We will keep you posted on all the developments. So stay tuned with Ymedia. But currently, I think there's a lot of uncertainty as far as the talks are concerned. President Trump, on one side, he said that yes, Vice President J.D. Vance would go there. There will be talks, but he's also threatening Iran as well in the same breath. Here is Iran. Iran has certain concerns, and I think one of the points which triggered Iran's concerns were when U.S. fired on one of the cargo ships in Gulf of Oman. The Iranian cargo ship, that was a major concern. Iran is still saying, we opened our blockade, but why U.S. is still continuing with the blockade? That's a violation of the ceasefire. U.S. won't open their blockade, and there are news reports as well that U.S. has entered another shipping vessel, and it's an oil vessel this time, and they're saying that it's an Iranian flagged vessel in the Indian Ocean. So that could be another escalation as we move further. Iran also wants some concrete steps to be taken. Will the ceasefire be extended? President Trump, in his interview to MSNBC, clearly stated that he doesn't want to extend this ceasefire. I think both the countries, they don't have much options, as much as U.S. definitely needs an off-ramp. Iran also would not want to go ahead with the war once again, but they made a very aggressive statement from Iran as well, that we have our finger on the trigger. But still, they would want to go ahead with the talks. But I think both the countries are still trying. Pakistan must be given due credit. They're trying their best to facilitate these discussions. Serena Hotel once again being prepared for these all important talks. The ceasefire deadline is approaching very fast. It's only a matter of hours now. So Islamabad security provisions are being done, but let's see how it goes. Ramona ji, your take on the current situation. Please go ahead.
Yeah, you described this escalating situation that we're ending a ceasefire, that we saw a war take place for 40 odd days. And the ceasefire that's been fragile for what will be 2 weeks now, ending tomorrow, well, at the end of tonight, could be seen that these two nations, including Israel, US, and Iran, will go back to war. Now, as much as we think that perhaps these countries want an off-ramp, essentially, they're not acting like they do. It seems like they do want to go back into war. And who do I mean by they? It seems like from the US side, they want to go back to war. Otherwise, these things would not be happening. In a way, I could, try to see what President Trump's strategy is. Perhaps, he's thinking, I'm going to, have our US naval ships block off the port of Iran. Then he triggered this whole thing that J.D. Vance is on his way for talks in Islamabad, even though we know for the past, week and a half now, since the last meeting that there wasn't really a second date scheduled. We heard talks that there would be a date scheduled soon, but there was no schedule of, oh, Tuesday, April 21st is the second talks. There's been no schedule like that. So for President Trump to, just tweet that, JD Vance is on his way to Islamabad, perhaps that was his way of trying to create pressure for a second meeting, coming to such a, deadline. And at the same time thinking Iran is going to show up to the table. And meanwhile, there's a blockade on Iranian ports. So it's kind of like under duress, make a deal with us on Iranian uranium enrichment or lack thereof for 20 years, have a plan for where to send your enriched uranium that you have in your possession. And then President Trump can say, hey, I got a deal. And we're done, essentially, by trying to create that pressure on Iran. Unfortunately, I was hoping that President Trump would see so far in this past, 40-odd day war that Iran wouldn't respond that way, that if anything, they would then not show up to having talks, and they would, say they're going to retaliate, and it's to be seen how they're going to retaliate. So I think that strategy on President Trump's side is not working. I think if he really does want Iran to come to the table for second round of talks, he needs to release the, U.S. naval ships away from the Iranian ports and then say, okay, let's have a reset. Because at this point, Iran is looking at it as like, we really don't trust you guys, right? We were in negotiations for our enrichment of uranium, and then you guys attacked us, bombed us on February 28th, and that was after last year's 12-day war. Then, killing the Ayatollah, essentially really dismantling the regime in a great degree. And then now we're in a ceasefire. Israel still continues its occupation in Lebanon. Again, today, it was reported Israel did kill 6 people in southern Lebanon. So even now Israel is, going against their 10-day ceasefire with Lebanon. So, and then all of these things are key factors. So it seems like, either side is just not on the same page when it comes to what are the ceasefire terms. And it seems like, the side that keeps kind of invading on the ceasefire terms is really trying to escalate. So I could assume from this situation that maybe President Trump does want to go back into war. It doesn't seem like he does want to come to an end of a war negotiation. And let's just say in a situation where he gets Iran to come to the table and they agree to this, is this President Trump's way of saying, okay, now hands off on Iran. I'm going to go back to my domestic issues. And then now I'm going to focus on, Canada, US, Mexico trade deal, which is due very soon in the coming months, in his way of like washing his hands off. But then I think the damage that's been done in this region and in terms of the, supply chain of oil, 20% coming from the Strait of Hormuz. And we know that so many oil refineries have been hit in so many different countries that we will have a supply issue even when this war is ended, that even when President Trump washes hands off things and says he won and then goes back to focus on North American sort of situation, and then Canada will be in the hot seat for how to deal with President Trump. But I think, you just can't wash your hands off, because I think the damage that's been done these past few weeks, it's going to take a very long time for us to recuperate the losses. I don't think we're going to see gas prices come down anytime soon. It might be incremental, even though like the 10 cents has been taken off by, the federal government here on the gas tax. It's still expensive compared to before this war started. So this could go anyway. This could escalate as early as tomorrow, and perhaps it's a way to see the matter is that maybe the U.S. wants to go back into war, and that's why Israel has, surpassed its ceasefire agreement with Lebanon, and the blockade was created by the U.S. even though the ceasefire terms were there. So, and then of course there was the hard line, right? In the first meeting, nothing was, there was no factor on the ceasefire that was initially started on September 7th that there was going to be zero uranium enrichment and a ban for 20 years. That was not part of the 10 points Iran put forward. Those were escalatory things in the last meeting. So the way Iran is looking at it is that if we show up to the second meeting and with our ports closed off, and you guys are going to have higher, red lines and be more severe on this, then Iran will look like it's losing its leverage. It's right now. I think the way Iran's looking at it is that they're trying to maintain their leverage by saying we're not coming to the table and making the president seem like he doesn't have a control over things. And that's why maybe the president said JD Vance is on his way, tried to push for the meeting, but we know that he wasn't, like you said. There was no videos, there was nothing of the vice president getting on his Air Force Two to go to Islamabad. And unfortunately, there's Pakistan with 20,000 security officials, blocked off roads. The amount they're spending to be able to secure their facilities for these talks, that may or may not happen. It's to be seen.
Yeah, and we're just showing you the latest pictures in Islamabad, Pakistan. If I can show them once again, the visuals coming from Islamabad, Pakistan. This is U.S. envoy, a U.S. envoy in Pakistan. She is meeting Pakistan's Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Affairs Minister Ishaq Dar, where Pakistan is requesting U.S. to extend the ceasefire. So that's the news coming from Pakistan. And I'll quickly move on to another video. If I can show the other visual, US forces have entered an Iranian tanker. We're not talking about the cargo vessel that was attacked earlier, but US is claiming that they entered an Iranian vessel and they've taken over this vessel without much of a confrontation. And this is, mind you, these are international waters we are talking here. So these are international waters. The video has been released by US. There you can see the US forces entering an Iranian tanker, this time in international waters. So Iran is already saying that in the Gulf of Oman, their cargo vessel was fired upon by US. That's clear violation. Their blockade still continues. That's clear violation. And here now reports of US forces entering Iranian vessel. Of course, Iran also fired upon vessels, including Indian flagged carrier. But then Iran says, US continued the blockade as well. So both sides blaming each other for violations as far as the ceasefire is concerned. But our major question is, first things first, do you think this will escalate or we could see some sort of peace? Ramona ji, what are the chances of peace? I think the window is continuously narrowing down as much as Pakistan is putting all the efforts there. It's good to see US envoy going and meeting Pakistan's Deputy Prime Minister. Islamabad is all set, but lots of discussions happening in Washington. There, Trump with his cabinet colleagues over there. But what do you think? What's your assessment? Are we going to see any breakthrough before the ceasefire deadline finishes, or you think this will cross the deadline?
Well, I think that, a couple of scenarios. If the ceasefire dates are not extended, right, and that means it ends, tomorrow, then things could escalate very fast. So that's one aspect. Will the two sides agree to extending the ceasefire until they can come to the table again? Let's just say in the scenario that they do extend the ceasefire for another 2 weeks, perhaps, another 10 days. 10 days, 2 weeks seems to be what President Trump usually goes with. And if that's the case, then in that period of time, then a couple of things need to be met, which is one is, the U.S., removing its naval ships, against the Iranian port and allowing for that to happen, for Iran to trade, and then keeping the Strait of Hormuz open. Essentially, what we're seeing with tankers, there's been reports that U.S. has been doing that to Russian ships in these past few years. Essentially, piracy is a thing that's happening in these open waters. There's been many reports in the past little while that this seems to be the case with what the U.S. is doing, and that's aside from what it's done already in Venezuela. So that's a whole nother conversation to be had. So there's that aspect, right? Now, what are the chances will the U.S. remove its naval ships against the Iranian port? It does not seem like it, because I think President Trump is looking at a way of like, let me apply pressure, get them on the table, get a deal done, say I won, wash my hands off, let the region deal with their own issues, go back to what I'm doing, in the US with other files. It seems to be like what he wants to do. So if in that case of that ceasefire continuing, then things could escalate in that ceasefire even. And hence, it's almost useless to use the word ceasefire because it's not a ceasefire. But in that case where they do extend it, and the U.S. blockade doesn't remove, then Iran will retaliate, and that's to be seen, and that could spark things up again. In a case where there is no ceasefire extension and tomorrow, things will escalate, then, U.S. and Israel will go back into war with Iran. Iran will target its GCC countries, and start, targeting Israel as well. Then the Israel-Lebanon ceasefire will fall apart as well completely. And then we'll be back in a war, and then we'll see the Strait of Hormuz closed off again. Now, what is the advantage of them going to war, which is because bad scenario with lives that have been already lost and thousands of people who've already been injured and millions of people who've been already misplaced from their homes. The other aspect is Iran will then, choke off the Strait of Hormuz. They can't now. I don't know how they're going to charge the $2 million for safe passage if the U.S. naval ships are there. That will be 1 second. Sorry, that'll be interesting to see how they're going to be able to protect the vessels coming through, having the American ships present. But it's going to escalate things even more. And I think to advantage of Donald Trump, well, the thing is, he doesn't need the oil. Americans don't need it. He's got the Venezuela, there's Canada, that is a big supplier of oil to the Americans as well. So there's that aspect. But what it means is Europe has to do something. Right now, they're talking about having sanctions on Iran for closing the Strait of Hormuz or trying to keep it open. I think sanctions are a little bit late. Sanctions are usually used before a war to prevent a war. So I think the European Union is a little bit too late to the game for all of that with talking about sanctions. But then also, what does it mean for the Gulf countries, right? Saudi Arabia, UAE, Oman, Qatar, where we haven't heard from them, essentially. They've been kind of quiet in all of this in terms of what is their position on this. We know Israel definitely wants to go to war because they want to continue their operations in southern Lebanon. I mean, when you look at the facts of Israel bombing Iran on February 28th and then starting their occupation in southern Lebanon on March 2nd, it was part of the plan, and then essentially Hezbollah, the proxy, Iranian proxy, is what they're claiming. But essentially, Israel does want to take over that land and occupy it. Even though right now in the 10-day ceasefire, we've heard millions of people are going back to southern Lebanon to see if their homes are there. We know it's a matter of time that Israel's going to continue its occupation of that land because they said they will. This is not speculation. This is their plans that they have openly talked about. They're letting us know what they want to do. So every way you look at this, if this increases, this is given all parties a chance to recalibrate, to get their weapons in order, to have new strategies. So perhaps this whole ceasefire was a mirage, perhaps, and really they just wanted to get a break from the 40-plus day war, to be able to regroup, reorganize, and go back into war. But we do know that when it comes to the region, it's like the fallout. Even if there is a peace agreement tomorrow, just to be able to rebuild Iran, just to be able to rebuild the ports that were damaged in the GCC countries, Iranian oil, all of this, and Saudi Arabia, that's had a lower production, UAE, the rest of them, we're talking about, trillions of dollars that have to go back to fixing that entire location. And then we have to look at all the countries that have relied on oil access from them, and where have they gone in the meantime? Have they gone straight to Russia? I mean, really, what's happening? So I think this is a long-term fallout to be able to see what it means.
Yeah, so once again, we'd like to remind our viewers right now that stay tuned with Ymedia and all our platforms, Channel Y US. You can watch us on Sling, on Dish Network, anywhere across US. You can watch Channel Y in Canada, Rogers 857, Bell 828, Telus 2418, Ignite 707. You can watch us digitally on Ymedia TV. Yes, download this app, Ymedia TV. You can watch us 24/7 live. If you're driving anywhere in Greater Toronto area, then stay tuned with Radio Y FM 105.9. You'll get all the latest updates right now. I think the way we look at things right now, US is trying to build a lot of pressure on Iran, but Iran is clearly saying we have some new cards. So what are these new cards that they are holding on? They haven't disclosed that. Let's see what will come out of these negotiations. The lead negotiator and their speaker, Mohammad Ghalibaf, he's also mentioning, we won't negotiate with a gun onto our head. So they are also saying, and they're preparing for more US attacks as they are in discussions for the talks. But the major point is the blockade which US has done, and now they had already captured their cargo ship, which Iran is asking back with the sailors and any of other members there. And now US, as we are showing the visuals, US, this is a bit of an escalation with US in international waters occupying one of their tankers. This is a bit of an escalation now. And US is, there are already 3 of their aircraft carriers are there in that area. Whether it's USS Abraham Lincoln, that's already there in Arabian Sea, then USS Gerald R. Ford, it's there in the Red Sea, then US George H. Bush, that's also going to be there. So 3 US carriers, and along with so many other naval things over there. I think approximately 40% of the things that are deployed anywhere, they all will be now deployed in that region. So US is assembling a lot of military and armed forces there in the region. That's one part of the story. Oil still at 96, 97, still below 100, but well above the mark. Russia is making a lot of money out of this simply because they know this, they're selling at a premium. Russia never thought, at least in 2026, the oil would go beyond maybe 65 or 70. Here they are selling oil at a premium right now. So Russia is making a lot of money out of this. Iran was also making money. It was also selling on premium. But then this US blockade, is trying to block Iran economically as well. Israel is claiming, they've claimed this before as well, that yes, as far as the nuclear weapon upgrade or the uranium upgrade, now they've taken care of all that. This was said earlier as well last year in the conflict in June by US and Israel simultaneously. As far as our knowledge goes, approximately 2,000 kg of enriched uranium is lying buried somewhere underneath those nuclear sites, which are a bit damaged now. So nuclear sites could be damaged, but that I would say even if the 450 or 500 kg of the uranium is around 60% enriched, that can be converted into weapon grade uranium, and you could make a minimum of 10 nuclear bombs. I know there are 9 countries who have nuclear weapons right now: India, Pakistan, 80 to 100 nuclear bombs, both of them. We don't know the exact number, but somewhere around 80 to 100. But Iran could be the 10th country making 10 nuclear bombs. So that's where they are right now. But it still has to be enriched weapon grade. US was earlier claiming, President Trump, that yes, we will take over that enriched uranium. There were discussions maybe Pakistan will take over. In 2015, when the deal was done, it was taken over by Russia and then supplied back for civil purposes. But this time Iran says no negotiations on that. So US is also offering approximately $20 billion. That's Iranian money, but that was sanctioned. So they're saying, okay, we'll lift the sanctions. But we just heard European Union announcing more sanctions on Iran. So as we are heading towards discussions, if at all they happen, so there are more sanctions on Iran. Ramona ji, your final take on the entire situation. And once again, we like to remind our audience, once again, stay tuned with all platforms of Ymedia for all the latest updates. Ramona ji, your comments.
Yeah, I think we have to look back at why this war started. We still haven't gotten a clear answer to why we're here today. Essentially, Caroline Levitt has been asked in the White House, and she still cannot tell us why, the president is in this war. President Trump cannot tell us why this war has started. We can go back to, February 28th, February 29th, the day after, if there was a February 29th, March 1st, and see, what they were saying, right? Essentially saying that Israel was going to go ahead and attack Iran, and the U.S. decided to follow through to mitigate damages to U.S. personnel. We know so far 13 U.S. soldiers have lost their lives. And so we know that this war has had many casualties. We're talking about in the thousands, 4,000 plus. We know that millions of people, like 1.5 million just in Lebanon, has been displaced. We know another million or so in Iran has been displaced. So but yet we don't know, right? And everything we heard about how Iran is an imminent threat to the United States or for nuclear bombs, we know that hasn't been the case. So we also have to reflect, why are we here? To understand how this is going to end, we have to understand why it even started. Like in any personal disagreement you have, or whether it's a professional disagreement, whether it's personal, the way you resolve it is to find out why did it start to begin with, address those issues in the beginning of what escalated to the disagreement. If it's a professional matter, you want to go to the root of the cause to be able to come to an agreement and how to solve it moving forward. Same thing in your personal life. So it's very difficult to talk about this war in a sense of like, where is it going to go if we don't know what the reason is? We could speculate some reasons. One could be what President Trump has said on his Truth Social, that Israel didn't make him go into the war. Meanwhile, everybody in America is claiming, President, tell us why we're in this war. Is it because Israel wanted to go to war? Israel has always said they wanted to go to war. Israel has always said that Iran is a big threat, and Iran has always said things about Israel that has made it appear as a threat. So we know no love lost between those two nations. So we know in that sense they have it, but we need to know why America got involved and why it escalated. And we know America funds significant part of this war. We know America's put most of its money into this war, whether personally, directly through themselves, of $1 billion a day, and also what in terms of the funding that it's given to Israel for this war and how they support them. So because we don't have those understandings, and even if we go back to regime change, okay, well, the president was told a regime change is not going to happen if you just do aerial strikes, right? It needs to be boots on the ground. We know that boots on the ground is difficult because the terrain in Iran, you have mountains, you have desert. It's very difficult to go by land invasion. We saw that happen in the Iran-Iraq war that went on for 8 years. And still the regime was able to, succeed in that matter by staying put. And that was a year after the regime change in Iran. So we know from historical data that ground operation is very difficult. We know that if U.S. wanted to get the enriched uranium, by bombing the sites last year, or even this year, or trying to send those fighter jets perhaps to remove the uranium, we know that didn't work out so well, right? Because we're still at it again. And then if it's about the Strait of Hormuz, that was never an issue. Like that was never a part of why the war started, because the Strait of Hormuz was always open before this war. So that can't be the reason why this war started. So it's very difficult to understand what it is that they all want if we don't know why it started. Now, given that we're here and we know that, the items that were on the table was stop enriching uranium for 20 years, Iran says, sure, we can do it for 3 to 5 years. And then you have these escalatory factors of the blockades and the oil tanker seizures and all that. And knowing that every time Iran has said that they're going to retaliate, they will, whether directly or through proxies, all we can assume from what's happening is that the aim is to go back into war. We know that military spending has gone through the roof for many different countries in the GCC, in the United States, even now in Canada, right? We've met our 2% of GDP for NATO, and we have the Prime Minister. He gave us his message here in Canada over the weekend, talking about how there's going to be so many more jobs when it comes to, the Canadian Army and the Canadian Defense Department, and that's really a lot of spending is going under that, which is really, helping the economy on the public spending, not so much on the private side. So everywhere you look at it, are all these countries trying to go into a wartime economy like what we've seen happen in Russia? That's been in this wartime economy for so long. And is that where the U.S. is heading? We know Israel definitely has that. Canada seems to be, investing in, and I'm not, and in no position am I saying Canada should or should not invest in its military, but I'm saying, we're looking at the numbers that are being spent. We know Saudi Arabia has just increased their spending. We know UAE and the rest of them. So is this the world we're moving into, right? There was a time where we could say before COVID era and after COVID era and how things changed, whether it was, the digital age came upon us and online shopping became a thing and distance and people going more inwards. There was the pre-COVID and the post-COVID era. And I think now we're looking at what is this? Is this a pre-war and post-war era where we're seeing that, governments that have been dealing with inflation and lost revenues when it comes to taxes and overspending and massive debt, are they trying to bring back their local economies through going into what would be, a defense strategy of becoming, a wartime economy, which is very sad because we're talking about, 8 billion people. We're talking about lots of lives lost. We're talking about, is that the reason why a lot of the oil plants were hit in different countries, whether it's Russia, because Ukraine did that. Also in Ukraine, we've seen that in Iran. We've seen that in the GCC countries. What's the plan? Is it to, trigger us into a recession since this, the global economy relies heavily on oil? And then having that to be a key factor because of the fallout of this war, and then escalate that through wartime spending. And at the end of the day, it's all taxpayer dollars, right? Like unfortunately, the only way we can say you take our tax dollars, how we're going to have a say in how the government spends it is by the government, by the party we elect. That's the most a Canadian can say, here's how you should spend our tax dollars, by listening to debates and voting in an election. As we've seen that right now we have Mark Carney, who's a very popular prime minister, but we don't know where he's going to take the Canadian economy. We've essentially chosen him to navigate through these waters. The Americans chose President Trump, who essentially lied to them, saying that he wanted to end forever wars. He wanted to, focus on domestic factors. He wanted to stop sending American tax dollars overseas. And is he, did he just lie on the non-forever wars and went into war just to bring America first, meaning, making sure it becomes more of a wartime economy? Who knows? What's happened is there's a lot of mistrust, I think, in all aspects. And so it's to be seen how this goes. But it looks like everything from the U.S. side that's been taking place is to go to war. And then President Trump can say, hey, I gave them an option to come to the table for a second round of talks. They didn't come. So we're at a war. And he could easily just post that on Truth Social, and then the retaliation from both sides will continue. And unfortunately, we're going to have a case where the leader of, Israel is going to go back into war with those regions as well. So that seems to be where things are at right now until we hear otherwise.
Yeah, at this point, I'd like to show you a picture that President Trump has released on its social media post. This is a picture of 8 Iranian women. So as far as the message from President Trump, Trump wants these 8 women to be spared by Iran. They're saying that these women, they're going to be hanged. We haven't independently verified all these pictures, but definitely if you see these pictures, they do include Dina Tahirbadi. She's just 16. Then it also has Mahbub Shabani, she's just 33. They were both arrested in February for resisting the regime. Along with, we also see in this picture Esnea Nejati. She's a Kurdish women's rights activist. She was sentenced to death last year. We know there has been a very brutal crackdown in Iran, not only against many protesters, but also against women as well. So are all these 8 women about to be hanged? They were arrested, some of them sentenced to death. But Trump is now requesting this will be, now President Trump is saying this will be part of the negotiations, and it will be a good start if Iran can spare these 8 women. This is President Trump requesting on his social media, Truth Social, with releasing these 8 pictures there. This is another part of diplomacy. Ramonaji, any comments on this one? And then we'll wrap it for now, but we'll carry on the latest updates at Ymedia. Please go ahead. Your comments on these 8 women.
Yeah, absolutely. We know that the protests were devastating for the Iranians. You know, there's estimates of 35,000 to 40,000 people killed in the protests that happened by their own government, by the Iranian regime. And so that's definitely a case that Iran's only saying about 3,000. So there's a massive discrepancy of what actually happened in Iran before this war started when it came to their domestic issues and what seemed like a revolution taking place. Now with President Trump putting this into aspect of the negotiations is him trying to show, you know, the world of like, hey, do you recall this is the Iranian regime? Because in the past, you know, and I'm just talking from President Trump's strategic aspect of things. In the past few weeks, in these couple of months of war, U.S. has lost the cultural narrative when it comes to online, right? Like you have, I don't know if you've seen any of those Lego style videos that came out, and that's coming out of Iran. That really, you know, looks at President Trump and the whole situation in Iran and with rap music over it, and it's had so many views and a lot, and really highly, you know, passed around by Americans saying, look at the cultural war with Iran and the United States and the narrative. And we know that President Trump went into this war without essentially getting the backing of Congress, without getting the backing of the American people, right? He didn't really create the what most presidents do when they want to go into war. They get, you know, they get their permission from Congress, they get the amount, but also they do a whole advertisement, if you want to call, you know, whether you want to call it propaganda for war, but they try to get the consensus of people. Like when it was you know, in the war against Iraq, you know, or Afghanistan, it was the 9/11, it was weapons of mass destruction, it was evil people. And then, you know, you need to have your population really support the war effort, right? And because this administration went into war very suddenly and surprised everybody with the bombs that, you know, happened on February 28th on Iran, essentially this president hasn't had the momentum that previous presidents have had when it came to support for war. And so this is a good thing to put on. Yes, highlight what this regime has done when it comes to its own civilian population, when it comes to women. But it's very interesting that he's using this right now and not 4 weeks ago or not 2 weeks ago. And this is his way of trying to say, like, you know, I need to get this deal done so I can go refocus my situation on other matters, right? More domestic and other things. So you always have to look at when things are presented. Why is it presented now? You know, who's supposed to view this? You know, and what's the reason and why now, right? And I could only see, great, I'm glad he's bringing it up, but it's very interesting timing for sure.
Yeah, and who is in control in Iran? Whether it's the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, I'm sure there's a vacuum as far as the leadership is concerned after Khamenei's death. So is the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, are they calling the shots there? Mujtaba Ali Khamenei, we've heard some statements from him, but we haven't seen him for now. President, or there are so many other things that we are listening. We also hear that the intelligence side also is being controlled by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. So IRGC, most of the Western countries, they have put sanctions on IRGC. So who are we dealing with over here? that's another question to be discussed. But we will keep you posted right here on Ymedia. Stay tuned with Ymedia for now. For now, let me reiterate this once again. Pakistan is trying its best. I'm going to show you pictures from Pakistan. They're trying their best to somehow convince US to get the talks going, increase the timeline for the ceasefire. But from the US side, the news is they've put JD Vance tour on hold for now, but it can happen any minute. But still, as I mentioned earlier at the start of the show, it's still going to take 15 hours to fly from Washington to Islamabad. And there were lots of discussion in Washington, in the White House. President Trump, we had Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth over there, and Vice President JD Vance. But we also have confirmed information. Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff, they were flown all the way from Miami to Washington for another round of discussions right there in White House, Washington, before if at all the delegation leaves for Islamabad. So we'll keep you posted right here at Ymedia. Ramona ji, thank you so much for the discussion, and I know it's hard to keep up with the updates. President Trump in its first term also, he's a headline-a-minute president, and even now he's keeping all of us, including the media, on our toes all the time. But we will keep you posted. Thank you, Ramona ji, for your time. Stay tuned. There are lots of news. There are other discussions to follow with Ramona ji. Stay tuned with Ymedia.